What happens when a legend of the silver screen walks into a trap set by a smug talk show host? Clint Eastwood, the man whose steely gaze could silence a room, stepped onto the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live, expecting a routine interview about his latest film. But the air crackled with tension from the moment he sat down. Kimmel, with his trademark smirk, had other plans, ones that would ignite a firestorm nobody saw coming. The audience, buzzing with anticipation, had no idea they were about to witness a clash that would echo through Hollywood. Eastwood, at 95, still carried the weight of his legacy, his voice low and gravelly, each word deliberate. Kimmel, younger, cocky, thought he could outmaneuver the icon with cheap shots and a hidden agenda. The stage was set for a showdown, and neither man was backing down. Eastwood settled into the guest chair, his weathered hands resting on his knees, eyes scanning the crowd. Kimmel leaned forward, his grin sharp, and launched into his opening jab. "So, Clint, your new movie, another gritty western, huh? Some folks say you're just rehashing the same old tough guy routine. Isn't it time to hang up the spurs?" The audience tittered, but Eastwood's jaw tightened, his stare cutting through Kimmel like a knife. "I make what I know," he growled, "and I know it better than anyone." Kimmel chuckled, undeterred, his tone dripping with condescension. "Sure, but critics are saying it's predictable, like you're stuck in the 70s. Don't you ever get tired of playing the same part?" The dig was deliberate, meant to provoke, and it landed hard. Eastwood leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "You think you can sum up my work in a soundbite, kid? You wouldn't last a day in my world." The crowd shifted, sensing the heat. Kimmel, unfazed, doubled down, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Oh, come on, Clint. You're a legend, but let's be real. Your last few films haven't exactly lit up the box office. Maybe it's time to let the younger guys take over, you know?" The audience gasped, a few boos rippling through. Eastwood's face hardened, his fingers curling into fists. "You got a lot of nerve," he said, his voice steady but laced with venom. "I've been making movies since before you were born. What have you done besides crack jokes and kiss up to celebrities?" The crowd erupted, some cheering, others stunned. Kimmel's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, leaning back with a forced laugh. "Whoa, touchy! I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. No need to get all dirty Harry on me." Eastwood wasn't having it. He stood, towering over the desk, his presence commanding the room. "You want to talk tough? Let's talk about you, Kimmel. You think you're clever, digging into my career like you've earned the right? You're a vulture, picking at people's work to get a laugh." The audience roared, split between shock and excitement. Kimmel's face flushed, his cool demeanor cracking. "Hey, I'm just doing my job," he snapped, standing to meet Eastwood's gaze. "You came on my show, old man. If you can't handle a little heat, maybe you shouldn't be here." The words hung heavy, the crowd holding its breath. Eastwood stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't know what heat is, but you're about to find out." The tension was electric, every eye glued to the two men. Kimmel, sensing he'd gone too far, tried to pivot, his voice softer now. "Look, Clint, let's talk about the movie, okay? Tell us about your process." But Eastwood wasn't buying the olive branch. "You don't get to backpedal now," he said, pointing a finger. "You wanted a fight. You got one. Let's see how you handle it when someone punches back." The crowd was on its feet, the energy chaotic. Kimmel, cornered, scrambled for control, but Eastwood's rage was a force of nature, unstoppable and raw. The interview was no longer a promotion. It was a battlefield, and the war had just begun. The standoff between Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel had the audience on edge, their cheers and gasps fueling the fire. Eastwood stood firm, his finger still pointed at Kimmel, who was visibly rattled but clinging to his bravado. The talk show host wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his eyes darting to the control booth for a lifeline that wasn't coming. He'd underestimated the old cowboy, and now the room pulsed with the consequences. Eastwood's voice, steady as iron, cut through the noise. You think you can drag my name through the mud for a few laughs? Let's talk about why you're really doing this. Kimmel's smirk returned, but it was shaky, his confidence fraying. What's that supposed to mean, Clint? I'm just asking questions the fans want answered. The lie was thin, and the crowd sensed it, their murmurs growing restless. Eastwood stepped around the desk, closing the gap between them. Don't play dumb, he said, his tone sharp enough to slice. You've been cozying up to those studio execs who want my project shelved. Think I don't know? You're their errand boy, pushing their narrative to make me look washed up. The accusation hit like a thunderbolt, and the audience erupted, some shouting in support of Eastwood, others stunned into silence. Kimmel's face twisted, his composure crumbling. That's ridiculous, he snapped, but his voice cracked, betraying him. You're paranoid, old man. Nobody's out to get you. Eastwood's eyes narrowed, his stare unrelenting. I've been in this game long enough to smell a rat. You're not as slick as you think. The crowd was electric, hanging on every word. Kimmel, desperate to regain control, leaned into the microphone, his tone venomous. You want to talk rats? Maybe look in the mirror, Clint. You're clinging to a career that's past its prime, and everyone knows it. You're embarrassing yourself. The insult was a low blow, and the audience booed, their loyalty shifting toward Eastwood. The legend didn't flinch. Embarrassing? He growled, stepping closer until he was inches from Kimmel. You're the one hiding behind a desk, taking cheap shots because you don't have the guts to create something real. I've built a legacy. You're just a mouthpiece for people who want to tear it down. The room roared, the energy raw and chaotic. Kimmel, cornered, tried to pivot, his voice rising with a mix of anger and panic. You think you're untouchable because you're Clint Eastwood? This is my show, and I say what goes. You don't get to come in here and lecture me. Eastwood's laugh was cold, cutting through the host's bluster. Your show? You're a rented suit, Kimmel. The second you stop delivering ratings, they'll toss you out like yesterday's trash. The audience gasped, some clapping wildly, others whispering in shock. Kimmel's fists clenched, his face red with fury. You're out of line, he shouted, jabbing a finger at Eastwood. You don't know me, and you don't scare me. Eastwood leaned in, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You should be scared. You picked the wrong fight. The confrontation was spiraling, each man digging in deeper. The audience was a sea of raised voices, some chanting Eastwood's name, others egging Kimmel on. The host, sensing the crowd slipping away, made a desperate move. Fine. You want to play dirty? Let's talk about your last flop. Word is, you blew millions and delivered a snooze fest. Care to explain that to your fans? The question was a dagger, meant to wound, but Eastwood was ready. You want to talk money? Let's talk about who's paying you to trash me. Name names. Kimmel? Or are you too spineless? The challenge hung in the air, and the crowd held its breath, waiting for Kimmel's next move. The clash was far from over, and the stakes were climbing higher by the second. The challenge hung heavy, Eastwood's demand for names pinning Kimmel like a spotlight. The talk show host froze, his eyes flickering with panic as the audience leaned forward, their anticipation a living thing. Kimmel's mouth opened, then closed, his usual quick wit failing him. He forced a laugh, but it came out brittle like glass about to shatter. You're reaching, Clint, he said, his voice tight. Nobody's paying me. I just call it like I see it. Your movies aren't cutting it anymore. The crowd murmured, some jeering at Kimmel's dodge, others shouting for Eastwood to press harder. The legend didn't budge, his stance unyielding, his gaze boring into Kimmel. You're lying, he said, slow and deliberate. And you're not. Good at it. Spill it, or I'll do it for you. Kimmel's face reddened, his hands slamming onto the desk as he stood, trying to reclaim authority. You don't get to accuse me on my own stage. he barked, his voice sharp with desperation. "You're a has-been throwing a tantrum because the world moved on without you." The insult stung, but Eastwood's response was a cold smile, his eyes glinting with defiance. "Moved on? I'm still here, making what people love. You're the one scrambling for relevance, begging for scraps from suits who don't care about you." The audience roared, their cheers for Eastwood drowning out Kimmel's attempt to interrupt. The host's facade was cracking, his confidence replaced by raw anger. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Kimmel spat, stepping out from behind the desk, his body tense. "You're a relic, Clint. Your fans are dying off and you're too stubborn to see it. I'm giving you a reality check." The crowd booed louder, their loyalty firmly with Eastwood. The legend took a step forward, his voice a low growl. "Reality? You wouldn't know it if it hit you. Those execs you're shilling for, they're scared of me. My films tell the truth, and they can't stand it. You're just their puppet, and you're too weak to cut the strings." The accusation landed like a punch, and Kimmel flinched, his eyes darting to the side as if expecting rescue. The tension was a live wire, sparking with every word. Kimmel, cornered, lashed out, his voice rising to a shout. "You're delusional. You think you're untouchable because you made a few good movies decades ago? Wake up, Clint. You're not the king of Hollywood anymore." Eastwood's laugh was sharp, cutting through the noise. "King? I never needed a crown. I earned my place, something you'll never understand. You're a coward, hiding behind snark, while you do their dirty work." The audience was on its feet, their shouts a deafening wave. Kimmel, his face a mask of fury, pointed at Eastwood. "Get off my stage," he snarled. "You're done here." Eastwood didn't move, his presence a mountain against Kimmel's storm. "I'm not done," he said, his voice steady, lethal. "Not until you admit who's pulling your strings. You want me gone? Make me." The crowd exploded, some chanting Eastwood's name, others stunned into silence by the raw intensity. Kimmel, shaking with rage, looked ready to lunge, but a producer's voice crackled through his earpiece, urging calm. He ignored it, his eyes locked on Eastwood. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the crowd. Eastwood leaned in, his words a quiet promise. "Try me." The standoff was a powder keg, and the next move would decide who walked away burned. The air in the studio was thick, every breath charged with the weight of Eastwood's challenge. Kimmel stood rigid, his threat to make Eastwood regret it still echoing, but the legend's unyielding stare held him in place. The audience was a restless sea, their shouts and chants swelling, some calling for Eastwood to finish it, others stunned by the raw hostility. Kimmel's hands twitched, his face a storm of fury and fear, knowing he was losing ground. He took a step back, his voice sharp but unsteady. "You think you can bully me on my own show? You're nothing but a tired old man with a grudge." Eastwood's eyes flashed, his response low and cutting. "And you're a sellout who thinks he's clever. Keep talking, Kimmel. You're digging your own grave." The crowd roared, their energy feeding Eastwood's resolve. Kimmel, desperate to turn the tide, gestured wildly to the audience. "You hear this guy? He's accusing me of some conspiracy because he can't handle criticism. Pathetic." The taunt fell flat, the crowd's boos drowning him out, their loyalty cemented with Eastwood. The legend stepped closer, his voice steady, slicing through the noise. "Criticism? You're not criticizing, you're attacking, and I know why. Those execs want my film buried because it exposes their game. You're their mouthpiece, and you're too spineless to admit it." Kimmel's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the control booth again, but no help came. "You're obsessed," Kimmel shot back, his voice rising to a near shriek. "Nobody cares about your little movie. You're just mad because you're irrelevant." The insult was a desperate swing, and Eastwood caught it with ease. "Irrelevant," he said, his tone cold as steel. My films have outlasted every fad you've ever chased. You're the one who's temporary, Kimmel. A loudmouth with no spine, doing what you're told for a paycheck. The audience erupted, their cheers shaking the room, some standing to clap, for Eastwood. Kimmel's face burned, his control slipping further. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, but his voice wavered, the crowd sensing his weakness. Eastwood pressed his advantage, his words measured but brutal. "I know enough. I know you're in bed with people who want to control what stories get told. My film's a threat, and you're their errand boy. How's it feel, selling your soul for a few extra minutes on air?" The accusation was a gut punch, and Kimmel staggered, his hands gripping the desk for support. "You're crazy," he muttered. But the crowd wasn't buying it, their shouts for Eastwood growing louder. Kimmel, cornered, lashed out. "You want to talk souls? You've been coasting on your name for years, milking the same old cowboy act. You're a fraud." The audience gasped, the insult crossing a line, and Eastwood's face hardened, his eyes blazing with quiet fury. The room felt like it might explode, every word a spark in a powder keg. Eastwood leaned in, his voice a low growl, each word deliberate. "Call me what you want, but I've earned every scar. You're just a parasite, feeding off other people's work. Admit who's paying you, or I'll keep going until everyone sees you for what you are." The crowd was on its feet, their roars deafening, some chanting Eastwood's name like a battle cry. Kimmel, his face pale, his bravado gone, looked like a man staring down defeat. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come, his silence louder than any retort. The clash was reaching its peak, and Eastwood was ready to deliver the final blow. Kimmel's silence was a surrender, his defiance crumbling under Eastwood's relentless pressure. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned forward, their cheers for the legend swelling into a thunderous wave. Eastwood stood tall, his presence commanding, his eyes locked on Kimmel, who seemed to shrink under the weight of the moment. The host's hands shook as he gripped the desk, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't know what you're doing, Clint. You're making enemies." Eastwood's response was a slow, deliberate shake of his head, his voice steady and final. "I've had enemies my whole life. They didn't stop me then, and you won't stop me now." The crowd exploded, their applause shaking the room, a testament to Eastwood's unyielding spirit. Kimmel, desperate to salvage something, tried one last jab. "You're a fool if you think this changes anything," he said, his voice hoarse, almost pleading. "You can't fight the system." Eastwood stepped closer, his shadow falling over Kimmel, his words sharp and clear. "I've been fighting systems since you were in diapers. My film's coming out, and it'll tell the truth, no matter who's paying you to shut me up." The audience roared, their support a tidal wave, some standing to clap, others shouting Eastwood's name. Kimmel's shoulders slumped, his fight drained, his eyes avoiding the crowd's gaze. He'd been exposed, and he knew it. Eastwood turned to the audience, his voice rising for the first time, strong and clear. "This man thought he could tear me down for a quick laugh, but he forgot who he's dealing with. I make movies for you, for the people who want stories that matter. Nobody's going to stop that, not him, not anyone." The crowd was on its feet, their cheers deafening, a unified cry of loyalty. Kimmel, defeated, sank back into his chair, his face pale, his hands trembling. He tried to speak, to muster some retort, but the words died in his throat. The audience had chosen their side, and it wasn't his. The legend stepped back, his point made, his victory undeniable. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes softening for a moment, a nod of gratitude to those who'd stood by him. "I came here to talk about my work," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'll be damned if I let anyone twist it for their own gain. You want to know about my film? Go see it. Judge it for yourselves." The applause was overwhelming. a standing ovation that filled the room with pride and defiance. Kimmel, left in the wreckage of his own making, could only watch as Eastwood walked off the stage, his head high, his legacy intact. As the cameras panned to the crowd, still cheering, the show cut to a break, but the energy lingered. Eastwood had faced down a trap and turned it into a triumph, exposing Kimmel's agenda and reclaiming his place as a titan of Hollywood. The audience, buzzing with excitement, knew they'd witnessed something unforgettable, a moment where truth and grit had won. Eastwood's film would hit theaters, its message untainted, and Kimmel's reputation would bear the scars of this clash. The legend had spoken, and the world had listened, proving once again that some fights are worth winning.